Every mother's greatest fear is losing her child to danger she cannot protect them from. Lady Elsinore faces this nightmare when her 16-year-old daughter returns home with bite marks on her neck. The wealthy widow knows the vampire, Lord Malrec, is responsible. She storms to his castle, demanding answers. But his response changes everything she thought she knew about her family. He speaks of an ancient pact between their bloodlines, a promise made generations ago that binds her daughter's fate to his. Now, Lady Elsinore must uncover the truth about her past. What secret has her family kept hidden for centuries? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Ravenshollow Manor, where Lady Elsinore Blackthorne stood at her chamber window, watching the mist roll down from the ancient hills. At 42, she possessed the kind of refined beauty that spoke of noble breeding and careful preservation. Dark hair streaked with premature silver, pulled back in an elegant chignon, and eyes the color of winter storms. Her black mourning dress, tailored from the finest silk, had been her constant companion for 3 years now, ever since her beloved husband Edmund had succumbed to fever. The manor itself stood as a testament to generations of Blackthorne prosperity. Built from local grey stone and adorned with intricate Gothic arches, it commanded respect among the village folk of Thornwick below. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes and family crests adorned the walls, while polished oak floors reflected the warm glow of countless candles. The Blackthorne family crest, a silver wolf beneath 3 stars, hung prominently above the great hearth, cast in pewter and polished to a mirror shine. Lady Elsinore wore a smaller version of this crest as a medallion around her neck, the ancient symbols etched into the silver, seeming to catch light even in the dimmest corners. Thornwick Village, nestled in the valley like a collection of children's toys, its thatched roofs and smoke-curling chimneys, creating a pastoral scene that had remained unchanged for centuries. The villagers lived simple lives, farmers, blacksmiths, weavers, and merchants who served the surrounding estates. They respected the natural order of things, nobles in their manors, commoners in their cottages, and the mysterious Lord Malrec in his forbidding castle that crowned the highest peak. That castle's Shadowmere Keep loomed over the entire valley like a stone guardian. Built into the very cliff face, its black towers pierced the sky, often shrouded in mist that seemed to cling to its walls regardless of weather. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, crossing themselves when its silhouette caught their eye. For 3 centuries it had been home to Lord Malrec, a figure more legend than man to most villagers. Lady Elsinore had lived with the knowledge of his presence all her life, as had her parents before her and their parents before them. The arrangement was simple and had worked for generations. Lord Malrec kept to his domain, protecting the valley from bandits and worse threats that roamed the wild lands beyond, and the villagers provided tribute in the form of livestock and grain. No one questioned this arrangement. It was as natural as the changing seasons. "Mother, you're brooding again." The melodic voice belonged to Rowena Blackthorne, who entered the chamber with the fluid grace of youth. At 16, she was becoming a striking young woman, with her mother's delicate features softened by her late father's gentle brown eyes. Her chestnut hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and she moved with the unconscious confidence of one who had never known true hardship. "I am contemplating, not brooding," Lady Elsinore replied, turning from the window with a fond smile. "There is a difference, though I suppose it may be too subtle for one of your tender years to appreciate." Rowena laughed, settling into the window seat beside her mother. "Father always said you had the most elegant way of calling someone young and foolish." The mention of Edmund brought a familiar ache to Lady Elsinore's chest, but it was a gentle pain now, softened by time and cherished memories. "Your father was a wise man. He understood the art of diplomatic conversation. Tell me again about how you met him." Rowena said, though she had heard the story countless times. "At the harvest festival, when I was barely older than you are now," Lady Elsinore began, settling beside her daughter. "He was the second son of a neighbouring lord, sent to discuss trade agreements with my father. But when he saw me dancing with the village children, quite improper for a lady of my station, he abandoned all pretense of diplomatic protocol and asked me to dance. And you said no," Rowena continued the familiar tale. "I said no because I had mud on my slippers and hay in my hair, but he waited until the next song, and the next, until I finally accepted." Lady Elsinore's eyes grew distant. "We danced until dawn, and by morning we both knew our fates were sealed. It had been a love match, rare among their class, and their union had brought prosperity to both estates. Edmund had been a gentle soul, more interested in his books and maps than in the politics of nobility. He had taught Rowena to read Latin and Greek, shared his passion for astronomy, and filled their home with laughter and learning. "I miss his stories," Rowena said quietly, "especially the ones about the old times when magic was common and heroes walked among us. Those were just tales, my dear, fantasy and folklore. But what about Lord Malrec? He's real enough, and the villagers say he hasn't aged a day in 50 years. Lady Elsinore felt a familiar chill at the thought. Mention of their mysterious neighbour. The villagers say many things, most of it nonsense born of too much ale and too little education. But you've seen him, haven't you? At the midsummer councils." Indeed, Lady Elsinore had encountered Lord Malrec on those rare occasions when the local nobles gathered to discuss matters affecting the entire valley. He was a striking figure, tall and aristocratic, with silver hair and pale eyes that seemed to see everything. His manner was impeccably courteous, his knowledge of law and tradition extensive, and his presence commanded respect from even the most powerful lords. What unsettled her was not his appearance or demeanour, but the way he seemed untouched by time. Her father had described him in identical terms 30 years ago. Her grandfather's journals spoke of him in the same way. Either the family possessed remarkable longevity, or there was truth to the whispered legends. "I have seen him," Lady Elsinore admitted. "He is a learned man, well-versed in the old laws and customs, but the tales of his supernatural nature are simply that, tales. Sarah's grandmother swears she saw him transform into a great black wolf during the winter of the plague, when he saved the village children from the fever. Sarah's grandmother also claims she can predict the weather by reading tea leaves and believes that wearing iron horseshoes will ward off evil spirits." Lady Elsinore rose from the window seat, smoothing her skirts. "I hardly think we should base our understanding of the world on the superstitions of village folk." But even as she spoke these dismissive words, Lady Elsinore remembered her own grandmother's warnings about walking alone after dark, about avoiding the old paths through the forest, and about the importance of wearing the family crest as protection. The elderly woman had spoken of old agreements and ancient honours, though she had died before explaining their full meaning. The rest of the day passed in comfortable routine. Lady Elsinore reviewed the household accounts with her steward, Master Thomas, a grey-haired man who had served the family for 30 years. The estate was prospering, their wool brought good prices in the market towns, the harvest had been bountiful, and the tenant farmers were content. "The village priest has been asking about increased donations for the church roof," Thomas mentioned, as they concluded their business. "Father Benedict is always asking for donations," Lady Elsinore replied. "But the church roof was repaired just 2 years ago. What could it possibly need now?" "He speaks of expanding the sanctuary, my lady, says the congregation has grown and requires more space for proper worship." Lady Elsinore frowned. The village population had remained stable for decades. If anything, some families had moved to larger towns, seeking better opportunities. "I shall speak with him myself. Perhaps his enthusiasm for improvement has exceeded his judgment." Father Benedict had arrived in Thornwick 5 years ago, replacing the elderly Father Martin, who had served the community for most of Lady Elsinore's life. The new priest was younger, more energetic, and possessed of strong opinions about proper Christian behavior. He preached fiery sermons about the dangers of superstition and the importance of rejecting pagan influences. As evening approached, Lady Elsinore found herself once again at her window, watching the sun set behind Shadowmere Keep. The castle's silhouette seemed to absorb the dying light, becoming one with the gathering darkness. A few lights flickered in its windows, proof that the mysterious lord was in residence. "You're doing it again," Rowena observed, joining her mother with a tray of evening tea. "Doing what?" "Staring at the castle. You always do when you're worried about something." Lady Elsinore accepted the offered cup, inhaling the fragrant steam. "I am not worried. I am simply contemplating," Rowena finished with a grin. "Yes, I know. But what are you contemplating so intently?" "The responsibilities of our position. The need to maintain good relations with all our neighbors, including those who choose to live in lofty isolation." "Do you think he's lonely up there, Lord Malrec? I mean, living all by himself in that enormous castle?" The question caught Lady Elsinore off guard. She had never considered the emotional state of their enigmatic neighbor, thinking of him more as a force of nature than a man with human feelings. "I imagine he has his reasons for choosing solitude. Some people prefer the company of books to the company of others." "Like Father did," Rowena said softly. "Your father enjoyed people. He simply found peace in learning and study. There is a difference between choosing solitude for wisdom and choosing it for—" She paused, realizing she was venturing into speculation about a man she barely knew. "For what? I do not know, my dear. And that is precisely why one should not make assumptions about the private lives of others." As night fell, Lady Elsinore performed her usual rounds of the manor, checking that doors were secured and fires banked safely. The servants had retired to their quarters, and the great house settled into comfortable silence. She kissed Rowena good night and retired to her own chamber, where she knelt before her private altar and offered prayers for her family's continued safety and prosperity. But as she prepared for sleep, her eyes fell once more on the family crest hanging above her dressing table. The silver wolf seemed to gleam in the candlelight, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw something else in the ancient symbols, a meaning she had never noticed before. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, speaking of old promises and sacred trusts. Lady Elsinore shook her head, dismissing such fancies as the product of an overactive imagination. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, and she would need a clear mind to meet them. She extinguished the candle and settled into her bed, pulling the warm quilts close against the mountain chill. But sleep did not come easily. Outside her window, the wind whispered through the ancient oaks, carrying with it the distant sound of church bells from the village below and something else, a haunting melody that seemed to drift down from the heights of Shadowmere Keep. It was beautiful and melancholy, like a lament for something long lost, and it filled her dreams with images of silver wolves running beneath starlit skies. 3 days later, the tranquil rhythm of life at Ravenshallow Manor shattered like glass against stone. Rowena had asked permission to take her evening walk through the gardens and into the edge of Whispering Woods, a request she had made countless times before. The path was well maintained, bordered by ancient oaks that had stood sentinel over the Blackthorn lands for centuries. Lady Elsinore had granted permission without hesitation, as she always did. Rowena was a sensible girl, well aware of the boundaries that separated safe paths from dangerous wilderness. "Be back before full darkness," Lady Elsinore had called from the manor steps, watching her daughter's figure disappear into the gathering twilight. The evening was particularly beautiful, with mist beginning to rise from the valley floor and the first stars appearing in the purple sky. But as the hours passed and darkness settled over the valley like a heavy cloak, Worry began to gnaw at Lady Elsinore's peace of mind. Rowena was punctual by nature, trained from childhood to respect the rhythms of proper household management. When the great hall clock chimed 10 times, and still her daughter had not returned, Lady Elsinore gathered the male servants and lit torches for a search. They found her at the manor's front gate, near midnight, walking slowly up the cobblestone path as if in a dream. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, her hair dishevelled, and there were leaves clinging to her skirts. But it was her expression that sent ice through Lady Elsinore's veins, distant and confused, as if she were seeing the world through a veil. "Rowena!" Lady Elsinore rushed to her daughter's side, gathering her into protective arms. "Where have you been? We have been searching for hours." "Searching?" Rowena blinked slowly, her brown eyes unfocused. "I was walking. Just walking through the woods. The moon was so beautiful tonight." "The moon?" Lady Elsinore looked up at the overcast sky where no moon was visible. "Darling, there is no moon tonight. The clouds have covered everything." Rowena followed her mother's gaze, confusion deepening on her face. "But I saw it clearly. It was full and bright, casting silver light through the trees. And there was music, the most beautiful music I have ever heard." Lady Elsinore exchanged worried glances with Master Thomas, who had accompanied the search party. The old steward's expression was grave as he took in Rowena's dishevelled state. "Come inside, my dear," Lady Elsinore murmured, guiding her daughter toward the manor. "You are clearly exhausted. A warm bath and a good night's sleep will set everything right." But as they climbed the front steps, the torchlight revealed something that stopped Lady Elsinore's heart. There, on the pale column of Rowena's neck, were 2 small puncture wounds, dark with dried blood. The marks were precise and deep, unmistakably the bite of some predator. "Your neck," Lady Elsinore whispered, her voice barely audible. "Rowena, what happened to your neck?" Rowena's hand flew to the wounds, her fingers coming away stained with blood. For a moment her eyes cleared, and fear replaced the dreamy confusion. I do not remember. There was something in the woods, but when I try to recall it, the memory slips away like water through my fingers." Lady Elsinore's mind raced through possibilities, each more terrible than the last. Wild animals, certainly, but none in these woods large enough to inflict such wounds on a standing person. Bandits, perhaps, though why they would bite rather than use conventional weapons made no sense. And then there was the explanation she dared not voice, the one that made her blood turn to ice in her veins. "Master Thomas," she said quietly, "please summon Dr. Aldrich immediately. Tell him it is urgent." "At once, my lady." The steward hurried away into the night. Lady Elsinore helped Rowena to her chamber, where she carefully cleaned the wounds with boiled water and wine. The punctures were deep but clean, showing no signs of infection. More disturbing was Rowena's continued disorientation. She spoke of silver moonlight, haunting melodies, and a presence in the woods that had been both terrifying and beautiful. "He was magnificent," she murmured as her mother tended to her neck, "tall and elegant, with eyes like starlight. When he spoke, the voice was like music itself." "Who, darling? Who was magnificent?" Rowena's brow furrowed with concentration. "I cannot remember his face clearly. Only that he was beautiful and sad, and when he looked at me, I felt as though he knew secrets about the world that I had never imagined." Dr. Aldrich arrived within the hour, an elderly man with gentle hands and a vast knowledge of both conventional medicine and folk remedies. He examined Rowena's wounds with careful attention, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "The punctures are clean and precise," he told Lady Elsinore privately, away from Rowena's hearing. "Too precise for any natural predator I know. And the depth suggests they were made with great care, almost surgically. Most concerning is the girl's condition. She exhibits signs of significant blood loss, yet the wounds are too small to account for it." "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "I am suggesting nothing, my lady. I am simply reporting what I observe." However, he paused, choosing his words carefully. There are old stories in these mountains, legends that speak of creatures who feed in ways that leave precisely such marks. Lady Elsinore felt the world tilt beneath her feet. You cannot be serious. I am a man of science, Lady Blackthorne, but science must acknowledge what it observes, even when those observations challenge our understanding of the natural world. Throughout the night, Lady Elsinore sat vigil beside her daughter's bed. Rowena slept fitfully, murmuring words in a language that sounded ancient and unfamiliar. Occasionally, she would cry out, reaching toward something only she could see. Her skin was pale, far paler than normal, and when Lady Elsinore touched her forehead, it was cold as marble. As dawn approached, Rowena's condition seemed to stabilize. Her color returned slightly, and her sleep became more peaceful. But when she awakened with the first light of morning, her brown eyes held flecks of silver that had never been there before. "Mother," she said softly, "I had the strangest dreams. I dreamed I could hear every heartbeat in the village, every whispered prayer in the church. I could smell the morning bread baking in the baker's ovens, and I could see the individual dewdrops on spiderwebs in the garden." Lady Elsinore's blood ran cold. Enhanced senses were among the most commonly reported changes in the old stories, the tales her grandmother had whispered when she thought no one else was listening. "Just dreams, my dear. Your body is recovering from shock." But even as she spoke these comforting words, Lady Elsinore's mind was made up. There was only one person in the valley who might have answers to what had befallen her daughter, only one individual who possessed the knowledge and perhaps the responsibility to explain the impossible. Throughout the morning, Lady Elsinore made her preparations with grim determination. She donned her finest dress, the one reserved for formal occasions, and braided her hair in the elaborate style befitting her station. Around her neck, she fastened the family crest medallion, its silver surface catching the morning light with unusual brilliance. At midday, she made her way to the village church, where the ancient bronze bell hung in its weathered tower. The sacred truce bell had been cast centuries ago, inscribed with symbols that predated Christianity in the valley. According to tradition, when rung by one who sought parley with supernatural forces, it would ensure safe passage and honorable negotiation. Father Benedict was deeply displeased by her request. "Lady Blackthorne, surely you do not give credence to such pagan superstitions. The bell is merely a historical artifact." "Father, I am not asking for your theological opinion. I am exercising an ancient rite that has been honored in this valley for longer than your church has stood." Her voice carried the authority of generations of noble breeding. "Ring the bell." Reluctantly, the priest pulled the rope. The bronze bell sang out across the valley, its deep tone carrying clearly to every corner of the land. 3 times it rang, as tradition demanded, and its sound seemed to hang in the air long after the metal had stilled. "The safe passage is granted for sunset to sunrise," Lady Elsinore said, more to herself than to the priest. "More than enough time to reach Shadowmere Keep and return. My lady, I implore you to reconsider this folly. My daughter lies wounded by something that should not exist, Father. If folly is required to find answers, then folly it shall be." She returned home to find Rowena awake and asking for raw meat, a request so unlike her normally delicate appetite that it confirmed Lady Elsinore's worst fears. As evening approached, she kissed her daughter goodbye and set out on horseback toward the castle that crowned the mountain. The path to Shadowmere Keep was treacherous, winding through forests where shadows seemed deeper than they should be, and every sound echoed with unnatural resonance. But the power of the sacred truce protected her, and she arrived at the massive iron gates as the last light of day faded from the sky. Lord Malrec was waiting for her. The gates of Shadowmere Keep stood open, as if Lady Elsinore's arrival had been anticipated. Torches blazed in iron sconces along the courtyard walls, casting dancing shadows against the ancient stone. Her horse's hooves echoed on the cobblestones as she rode through the archway, each sound seeming to announce her presence to unseen watchers. The castle was far grander than she had imagined. Where village rumors spoke of a crumbling fortress haunted by an ancient recluse, she found instead a magnificent stronghold, maintained in perfect condition. Tapestries depicting heraldic beasts adorned the walls, their colors rich and vibrant despite their obvious age. Carved gargoyles perched on every corner, their stone eyes seeming to follow her movement through the courtyard. A stable boy appeared young, well-dressed, and remarkably composed for someone serving in a vampire's household. He took her horse's reins with a respectful bow, speaking not a word but conveying through his manner that she was expected and welcome. "Lady Elsinore Blackthorn." The voice came from the shadows of the main entrance, cultured and resonant. Lord Malrec stepped into the torchlight, and she saw him clearly for the first time in many years. He was exactly as she remembered from the midsummer councils, yet somehow more imposing in his own domain. Tall and aristocratic, with silver hair that caught the firelight and pale grey eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge and experience. His clothing was formal but understated, dark velvet doublet, well-tailored hose, and a cloak lined with silk that moved around him like liquid shadow. Lord Malrec. She dismounted with practiced grace, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I thank you for receiving me at such an hour. The sacred truce grants you safe passage and honorable hearing," he replied, his voice carrying no trace of surprise at her presence. "Though I confess I had hoped this conversation might never prove necessary." The admission sent a chill through her. It suggested he knew exactly why she had come. "Then you are aware of what has befallen my daughter?" "I am aware of many things, Lady Blackthorn. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in more comfortable surroundings." He gestured toward the castle entrance. "The night air can be quite cold at this elevation." The great hall of Shadowmere Keep was breathtaking in its grandeur. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by pillars carved with intricate designs that seemed to shift and dance in the firelight. A massive hearth dominated one wall, its flames providing both warmth and illumination. The floors were polished marble covered with carpets that spoke of wealth and refinement. What struck Lady Elsinore most was the sense of life within these walls. This was not the lair of a monster, but the home of a nobleman who valued beauty and comfort. Books lined built-in shelves, musical instruments waited on elegant stands, and fresh flowers graced several tables despite the season. "Wine?" Lord Malrec offered, moving to a sideboard laden with crystal decanters. "Thank you." She accepted the goblet, noting that his fingers were warm when they brushed hers, not the cold touch of the undead that folklore described. He poured wine for himself as well, she noticed, and drank from it naturally. Either the legends were wrong about vampires' relationship with mortal food and drink, or Lord Malrec was far more complex than the simple monster she had expected to confront. "You have come seeking answers about your daughter's condition," he said, settling into a chair beside the fire and gesturing for her to take the seat opposite. "Before I can provide those answers, I must ask, what do you remember of your family's history? The true history, not the sanitized version recorded in church documents and official chronicles. I remember my grandmother's stories. Tales of the old days when magic was common and the boundaries between worlds were less clearly defined." Lady Elsinore chose her words carefully, unsure how much to reveal. She spoke of agreements made in desperate times, of alliances that preserved our family when others fell to plague and war. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. She understood that survival sometimes requires accepting uncomfortable truths." Lord Malrec swirled the wine in his goblet, watching the dark liquid catch the firelight. "Tell me, what do you see when you look at me?" The question caught her off guard. "I see a nobleman, cultured, educated, and She paused, studying his face more carefully. Ageless. You appear exactly as you did when I first saw you 20 years ago. And how do you explain that observation to yourself? I have tried very hard not to explain it at all. The honesty of her answer surprised her. It is easier to avoid difficult questions than to face answers that might shatter one's understanding of the world. A practical philosophy, but one that becomes impossible when the world intrudes, regardless of our preferences. He leaned forward slightly, his pale eyes holding hers. Your daughter has been marked, Lady Blackthorne. Not as prey, but as heir to something that was promised long ago. Marked by whom? By you? Indirectly, yes. Though the choice was not mine alone. Lord Malrec rose and moved to a tall window that looked out over the valley. Walk with me. There is something you must see. He led her through corridors lined with portraits, past chambers filled with art and artifacts that spoke of centuries of collection. In one room, she glimpsed what appeared to be an alchemical laboratory, complete with glass, vessels, and careful notes written in multiple languages. In another, shelves of books reached from floor to ceiling, their leather bindings bearing titles in scripts she did not recognize. You are not what the stories claim, she said as they walked. Stories have a way of simplifying complex truths. It is easier to speak of monsters and heroes than to acknowledge the grey spaces where most of reality exists. He paused before a particular door, his hand resting on the ornate handle. What lies beyond this door may disturb you, but it will answer your questions about your daughter's fate. The chamber beyond was a study, clearly Lord Malrec's private sanctuary. Ancient maps covered the walls, marked with symbols and notations that tracked the movements of bloodlines through centuries. A massive desk held correspondence in multiple languages, treaties and agreements that bore seals she recognized and others that were completely foreign. But what drew her attention was a glass case in the center of the room. Within it, nestled on black velvet, lay a pendant unlike anything she had ever seen. The moonstone at its center seemed to glow within a light, and the silver setting was worked with symbols that made her family crest seem simple by comparison. I found this in your daughter's room after she returned from the woods, Lord Malrec said quietly. It appeared the moment her transformation began. Lady Elsinore stared at the pendant, her mind reeling. That is impossible. I would have seen it before now. Would you? How carefully do you examine your daughter's possessions? And even if you had seen it, would you have recognized its significance? He moved to stand beside the case. This pendant awakens only when the bloodline is ready to accept its inheritance. It has been waiting 16 years for Rowena to come of age. What inheritance? What are you talking about? The same inheritance that flows in your veins, though it has remained dormant in your vote. Generation. The blood of both mortal nobility and something far older. Lord Malrec turned to face her fully. Your family line carries vampire heritage, Lady Blackthorne. Not recent, but ancient. A deliberate joining of bloodlines that has protected your family for centuries. The words hit her like physical blows. No, that is impossible. We are a Christian family, noble and pure. Noble, yes, pure. He gestured to the pendant. That depends entirely on your definition of purity. Lady Elsinore felt her legs weaken and grasped the edge of the desk for support. Everything she believed about her family, her heritage, her very identity, was crumbling around her like a castle built on sand. The bite marks, she whispered, were not the cause of her transformation, but the result of it. When vampire blood awakens in a bloodline, it calls to its source. I found her in the woods, confused and frightened, as her nature began to manifest. The marks you saw were from my attempt to help her manage the transition safely. You bit my daughter. I saved your daughter from a transformation that could have killed her without proper guidance. His voice remained calm, but she heard steel underneath. The alternative was to let her burn herself out as untrained power consumed her from within. Lady Elsinore sank into the nearest chair, her world reeling. This cannot be true. The pendant proves otherwise, as does her enhanced hearing, her improved vision, and her sudden craving for rare meat. Lord Malrec moved to pour her another glass of wine from a decanter on his desk. The question now is not whether this is true, but what we do with the truth. Lord Malrec moved to another section of his study, where ancient scrolls lay carefully preserved in glass cases. He selected one particular document, handling it with reverence born of centuries of care. The parchment was yellowed with age, its edges brittle, but the text remained clearly visible, written in both Latin and symbols that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. "The blood covenant of House Blackthorn and House Malrec," he said, unrolling the scroll on his desk. "Signed in the year of our Lord 1387, during the great plague that nearly destroyed this entire valley." Lady Elsinore approached reluctantly, drawn by a mixture of horror and fascination. The document bore seals. She recognized the Blackthorn wolf crest prominent among them, alongside others that were unfamiliar but clearly ancient and powerful. At the bottom, two signatures stood out in ink that seemed darker than the rest: Evangeline Blackthorn and Lucien Malrec. "My ancestor," she whispered, touching the glass that protected the scroll. "Great-great-grandmother Evangeline. But the family records say she died in the plague. The family records say many things that are not entirely accurate. The truth is more complex." Lord Malrec's finger traced the elegant script without touching the precious document. "Evangeline Blackthorn was 19 years old when the plague reached this valley. It killed her parents, her siblings, most of the noble families, and nearly 3/4 of the common folk. She was left alone to govern lands, populated mostly by the dying. What does this have to do with everything?" His pale eyes met hers. "Because Evangeline Blackthorn made a choice. When conventional medicine failed, when prayer offered no salvation, when even the strongest families fell to disease, she sought help from the one power in the valley that the plague could not touch." Lady Elsinore felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I had been lord of these lands for 2 centuries by then. I had seen plagues before, watched civilizations rise and fall, observed the cycle of mortal life and death with the detachment that comes with immortality. But Evangeline, his expression softened, and for a moment Lady Elsinore glimpsed something unexpectedly human in his features. She changed everything. He moved to the window, gazing out at the valley where lights flickered in cottage windows far below. "She came to me not as a supplicant begging for aid, but as an equal proposing an alliance. She offered to bind our bloodlines in exchange for my protection of her people, not for herself alone, but for every soul in the valley. Bind your bloodlines how? Through marriage, through the voluntary sharing of immortal blood, through the creation of a legacy that would endure long after the plague had passed." Lord Malrec turned back to face her. "Your ancestor became my bride, Lady Blackthorn, not through coercion or supernatural compulsion, but through love." The word hung in the air between them like a revelation. Lady Elsinore stared at the covenant, trying to reconcile this romantic tale with everything she had believed about her family's history. The church records were altered to protect later generations from persecution. The official story became that Evangeline died heroically, caring for plague victims. The truth was that she accepted vampire blood to gain the power necessary to heal others, then used that power to save the entire valley. But she died. I have seen her tomb in the family cemetery. She died, yes, but not for another 60 years, after ensuring that her children and their children would carry both mortal nobility and supernatural protection. The tomb contains her remains, but not the entire truth of her life. Lady Elsinore sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. If this is true, why have I never manifested any supernatural abilities? Why has my family lived as ordinary mortals for generations? Because the covenant was designed to protect you from that burden unless it became necessary. The vampire heritage lies dormant until awakened by great need or coming of age in a generation blessed with particularly strong blood. Lord Malrec moved to stand beside her. Chair. Rowena represents the first awakening in over a century. Blessed, Lady Elsinore repeated bitterly. You call this a blessing? I call it survival. Without the protection of our joined bloodlines, your family would have perished in the plague along with all the others. Your daughter exists because Evangeline Blackthorne had the courage to embrace an unconventional solution. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the courtyard below. Lord Malrec moved swiftly to the window, his expression darkening as he observed the new arrivals. "We have visitors," he said, his tone carrying a warning. "Father Benedict and several men from the village. They ride armed and carry torches." Lady Elsinore joined him at the window, her heart sinking as she recognized the priest's familiar figure among the mounted men. "He must have followed me despite the sacred truce. The sacred truce protects you, not me. And I suspect Father Benedict's respect for ancient customs is somewhat limited." Lord Malrec moved to a cabinet and withdrew a sword, its blade gleaming silver in the candlelight. More concerning is the fact that he would dare approach Shadowmere. Keep at all. It suggests he knows more about tonight's events than a simple village priest should. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Father Benedict's arrival 5 years ago coincided with increased church interest in this valley. I have received inquiries from certain ecclesiastical authorities regarding old agreements and supernatural influences in the region." The sound of the great door opening echoed through the castle, followed by boots on marble floors and voices raised in what sounded like challenge rather than request. Lord Malrec cursed softly in a language Lady Elsinore did not recognize. "They should not be able to enter uninvited," he muttered. Unless what? Unless someone who has the right to grant invitation has already done so." His pale eyes fixed on hers with sudden understanding. "Lady Blackthorne, when Father Benedict requested increased donations for the church, what exactly did he say he needed the money for?" "Expanding the sanctuary." He claimed the congregation had grown. Understanding dawned like cold sunrise. "But the population has not increased." "No, but the church's influence has, and if he has been consecrating new ground, claiming it in the name of his authority." Lord Malrec set down his sword and moved instead to the covenant scroll. "He may have found a way to challenge the ancient protections that govern this valley." The voices below grew louder, and Lady Elsinore could make out Father Benedict's distinctive tones, calling for Lord Malrec to show himself an answer for his crimes against Christian souls. "What crimes?" she asked. "The crime of existing outside church authority, the crime of representing a power that predates their dominion." Lord Malrec carefully rolled the covenant and secured it in an ornate metal tube. "And now the crime of awakening supernatural heritage in a young woman who should, by their reckoning, remain safely mortal and ignorant." "They know about Rowena? They know something has changed. Your daughter's transformation was not subtle to those trained to recognize such things. Enhanced senses, unusual strength, altered appetites, these changes create ripples that those who hunt supernatural beings can detect." Lady Elsinore felt ice form in her veins. "Hunt? Father Benedict is hunting my daughter. Father Benedict is hunting anything that threatens the Church's version of natural order. Your daughter, me, and now you as well, since you have chosen to seek answers rather than accept ignorance." The sound of footsteps on the stairs grew closer. Lord Malrec moved to Lady Elsinore's side, his expression grave but determined. "The sacred truce still protects you from direct harm," he said quietly. but I suspect Father Benedict has found ways to interpret ancient law that serve his purposes. We must be very careful with our words. What do they want? To eliminate what they see as corruption. To restore what they believe is proper order. Lord Malrec's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. To separate you from your daughter's supernatural heritage by any means necessary. The heavy oak doors of Lord Malrec's study burst open without ceremony, revealing Father Benedict, flanked by 4 men bearing torches and silver crosses. The priest's usually composed demeanor had transformed into something hard and predatory, his dark eyes scanning the chamber with the intensity of a hunter who had finally cornered his quarry. "Lord Malrec," Father Benedict declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You stand accused of corrupting a Christian soul and violating the sacred boundaries between the natural and unnatural worlds." Father Benedict, Lord Malrec replied with perfect courtesy, though Lady Elsinore noticed his hand resting casually near the silver sword he had set aside. How unexpected to receive such distinguished visitors at this hour. I was not aware that the sacred truce had been dissolved. The sacred truce protects Lady Blackthorn, not the creature that has ensnared her. The priest's gaze fell upon Lady Elsinore with something that might have been pity. "My lady, you have been deceived by honeyed words and supernatural glamour. This being seeks to claim your daughter for purposes that would damn her immortal soul." Lady Elsinore felt anger rise within her at being spoken to as if she were a child. "Father Benedict, I came here seeking answers about my daughter's condition. I have found them. You have found lies wrapped in seductive truths. This creature," he gestured dismissively toward Lord Malrec, "has poisoned your mind with tales of ancient covenants and romantic alliances. The reality is far simpler. He is a predator who feeds upon human blood and has marked your daughter as his next victim." "If that were true," Lady Elsinore said, surprising herself with her calmness, "would I be standing here unharmed? Would he have shared documents proving his connection to my family? Would he have saved Rowena from a transformation that could have killed her?" "Saved her." Father Benedict's voice rose with righteous indignation. "He has cursed her, transformed an innocent Christian maiden into something unholy and unnatural." Lord Malrec moved slightly, positioning himself between the priest and Lady Elsinore. "Perhaps you should explain to Lady Blackthorn exactly how you came to know about her daughter's condition, Father Benedict. I am curious about your sources of information." The priest's eyes flicked toward one of his companions, a nervous-looking man Lady Elsinore recognized as Samuel the baker. Concerned citizens brought reports of unusual behavior, strange appetites, unnatural strength, eyes that reflected light like an animal's in darkness. "Concerned citizens," Lord Malrec repeated softly, "or trained observers who know what signs to watch for. I do not know what you are implying. I am implying that your arrival in Thornwick 5 years ago was not the random assignment of an ordinary parish priest. I am implying that certain ecclesiastical authorities have been watching this valley with particular interest, waiting for signs of supernatural awakening." Lady Elsinore felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The questions about increased church donations, the requests for expanding the sanctuary. "You have been preparing for this moment." Father Benedict's mask of priestly concern slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. "The Church has a duty to protect God's children from the servants of darkness. When ancient evils stir, faithful servants must be ready to act." "And what action do you propose to take?" Lord Malrec asked, his voice deadly quiet. "The girl must be brought before proper authorities for evaluation and possible treatment. You must submit to binding by holy relics until the Church can determine appropriate measures." The priest gestured to his companions, who began to spread out around the chamber. "Lady Blackthorn will be escorted safely home and protected from further supernatural influence." "Protected," Lady Elsinore repeated. "You mean imprisoned. Safeguarded, Father Benedict corrected, until we can determine the extent of the corruption and whether it can be cleansed. The euphemism sent ice through Lady Elsinore's veins. She had heard similar language used about women accused of witchcraft, about children born with unusual abilities, about anyone who did not fit the Church's narrow definition of natural order. "And if it cannot be cleansed?" she asked. The priest's silence was answer enough. Lord Malrec moved with supernatural speed, placing himself directly in front of Father Benedict. Though he made no clit-staying, threatening gesture, his presence radiated power that made the armed men step back involuntarily. "You will not touch the girl," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the stone walls themselves. "The blood covenant between our houses is sealed in law, both human and supernatural. Any attempt to harm her or force separation from her heritage will be considered an act of war. Your supernatural laws hold no authority over Christian souls," Father Benedict declared. But Lady Elsinore noticed his hand trembling slightly as he raised his silver cross. "Perhaps not. But the laws of noble birthright and family protection do." Lady Elsinore stepped forward, drawing upon generations of aristocratic authority. "My daughter is under my guardianship and protection. Any action taken against her without my consent would be an act against House Blackthorn, and I assure you, Father Benedict, we are not without influence in both ecclesiastical and secular courts." The priest's eyes narrowed. "Your influence may not extend as far as you believe, my lady. The Church's reach is long, and its memory longer. There are records of the irregularities in your family line that date back centuries. Records can be interpreted many ways," Lord Malrec observed. "And I possess documents that paint a rather different picture of those irregularities than the version your superiors prefer." He moved to his desk and withdrew a portfolio of papers, spreading them carefully where all could see. Among them was the marriage certificate of Evangeline Blackthorn and Lucien Malrec, witnessed by church officials and bearing ecclesiastical seals. "Your own institution sanctified the union that created the bloodline you now seek to destroy," Lord Malrec said calmly. "These documents bear the signatures of bishops and the seal of papal authority from the 14th century. Are you prepared to declare that the Church itself was corrupted when it blessed the Temsav, covenant that saved an entire valley from plague?" Father Benedict studied the documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled. These could be forgeries. They could be, but are you willing to stake your career on that assumption? Are you prepared to explain to your superiors how you attacked a noble family based on suspicion rather than proof? Lady Elsinore watched the conflict play out across the priest's features. Whatever authority had sent him to Thornwick, he clearly had not expected to encounter documented proof of church involvement in the supernatural agreements he sought to destroy. "The girl is still corrupted," he said finally. "Whatever ancient authorities may have sanctioned this union, the result is an abomination that threatens the spiritual welfare of everyone in this valley. The girl," Lady Elsinore said with steel in her voice, "is my daughter, and she is under the protection of agreements that your own church witnessed and blessed. If you wish to challenge those agreements, I suggest you take the matter up with ecclesiastical courts rather than attempting to resolve it through midnight raids and armed intimidation." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, each party calculating advantages and risks. Finally, Father Benedict stepped back, his hand still gripping his silver cross. "This is not finished," he warned. "The Church will not ignore the presence of supernatural corruption in a Christian community. There will be investigations. There will be questions that require answers." "There will indeed," Lord Malrec agreed. "And I look forward to providing those answers to properly constituted authority rather than vigilante priests who exceed their mandate." Father Benedict signaled to his men, and they began to withdraw toward the door. But before leaving, He turned back to Lady Elsinore. "Consider carefully what you choose to protect, my lady. Some inheritances are better abandoned. When they were gone, Lady..." Elsinore sank into a chair, the weight of everything that had transpired settling upon her like a physical burden. "Will they return?" she asked. "With greater numbers and higher authority," Lord Malrec confirmed grimly. "Father Benedict was testing our defenses tonight. The real attack will come later, when they have had time to plan and gather resources." Lady Elsinore looked at the marriage certificate still spread on the desk, the proof of a love that had transcended the boundaries between mortal and immortal worlds. For the first time, she began to understand that her daughter's transformation was not a curse to be cured, but a legacy to be embraced and protected. Then we must be ready for them. The journey back to Ravenshollow Manor passed in tense silence, with Lady Elsinore's mind churning over everything she had learned. The ancient covenant, her daughter's supernatural heritage, the threat posed by Father Benedict, each revelation demanded a complete reconsideration of her family's past and future. Lord Malrec had insisted on escorting her partway home, his presence a reassuring shadow in the pre-dawn darkness. "The transformation will accelerate now," he had warned before they parted ways at the forest's edge. "Confrontation with those who would deny her nature will trigger defensive responses. Rowena will need guidance to control what is awakening within her." Lady Elsinore found her daughter awake and pacing her chamber like a caged wolf. The changes were immediately apparent. Rowena moved with fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural, and her eyes held flecks of silver that caught the candlelight with unnatural brilliance. When she turned toward the door, her mother saw that her canine teeth had grown slightly more pronounced. "Mother," Rowena said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the very air seem to vibrate. "I could hear your heartbeat from the moment you entered the gates. I can smell the mountain air in your clothing, and something else, something ancient and powerful. You can sense Lord Malrec's presence on me," Lady Elsinore said, setting aside any pretense of normalcy. "We need to talk, my darling, about what you are becoming and what it means for our family." Over the next hour, Lady Elsinore shared everything she had learned at Shadowmere Keep. She spoke of Evangeline's sacrifice, of the covenant that had saved their bloodline, and of the love story that had made Rowena's transformation possible rather than fatal. To her surprise, her daughter listened with calm acceptance rather than the horror she had expected. "I dreamed of her last night," Rowena said when the tale was finished. "A woman with my face but older, standing in a great hall beside a man with silver hair and kind eyes. She was telling him about the children who would come after her, the generations who would carry both human nobility and supernatural strength." "Evangeline," Lady Elsinore whispered, "you saw your ancestor. She was not afraid. Even knowing what the transformation would cost her, what it would mean for her descendants, she was not afraid." Rowena moved to the window that looked out toward Shadowmere Keep. "I understand now why I have always felt incomplete. Part of me was sleeping, waiting for the right moment to awaken." Lady Elsinore studied her daughter's profile, seeing the strength and determination that had always been there, but was now enhanced by something otherworldly. "Are you afraid now?" "No. I am angry." Rowena's hands clenched into fists. "Angry that we have lived in ignorance of our true heritage. Angry that Father Benedict and others like him would destroy something beautiful and sacred because it does not fit their narrow understanding of the world." As if summoned by their conversation, a commotion arose in the courtyard below. Lady Elsinore looked out to see torch-bearing villagers gathered at the manor gates, their voices raised in agitation. Among them, she recognized several faces. Families who had known the Blackthorns for generations, now twisted with fear and suspicion. "Lady Blackthorn," called out Thomas the Miller, a man whose children Rowena had taught to read just 2 summers ago. "We demand to see your daughter. Father Benedict says she has been cursed by the devil himself." Cursed to drink blood and steal the souls of good Christian folk, added Margaret the Weaver, her voice shrill with hysteria. Lady Elsinore felt her heart break as she realized how quickly fear could transform neighbors into enemies. These were people she had known all her life, families the Blackthorns had protected and supported through countless hardships. Now they stood ready to destroy a 16-year-old girl because a priest had convinced them she posed a supernatural threat. "I need to go to them," Rowena said, moving toward the chamber door. "Absolutely not." Lady Elsinore blocked her path. "In your current state, with your emotions running high, you could accidentally harm someone. That would only confirm their worst fears. Then what do we do? Hide until they break down our doors?" Before Lady Elsinore could answer, Master Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face grave with worry. "My lady, the crowd grows larger by the hour. Father Benedict has been visiting every household, telling tales of demonic possession and supernatural corruption. He has convinced them that the very air around Miss Rowena has been tainted. Has anyone tried to force entry? Not yet. But they speak of waiting until morning, then demanding the right to examine the young miss for signs of devil's marks." The old steward's voice shook with distress. "My lady, some carry wooden stakes and silver crosses. They mean to test her nature through violent means." Lady Elsinore felt ice form in her veins. "Violence? They speak of exorcism, my lady, of driving out demons through pain and holy torture." Thomas looked toward Rowena with eyes full of sorrow. "These are good people, but fear has made them forget their Christian charity." Rowena moved to her dressing table, where an ornate mirror reflected her changed features back at her. As Lady Elsinore watched, her daughter's eyes began to glow with silver light, and the mirror's surface seemed to ripple like water. "What is happening?" Lady Elsinore breathed. "The transformation mirror," Rowena said softly, as if the knowledge came from somewhere deep within her inherited memories. "It shows truth rather than mere reflection." In the mirror's depths, Lady Elsinore saw not her daughter's chamber, but visions of the past. Evangeline Blackthorne, standing before this same mirror, watching her own transformation with courage and determination. Other women of their bloodline across the centuries, each facing the moment when human and supernatural natures merged into something greater than either alone. "Every generation of our family has produced women of unusual strength and intuition," Rowena observed, studying the reflected images. "But the full supernatural heritage awakens only when it is needed most. When threats arise that require more than mortal power to overcome. Like now," Lady Elsinore understood. "Like now." Rowena turned from the mirror, and Lady Elsinore saw that her daughter had made some internal decision. "Mother, I will not cower in this chamber while ignorant fear destroys everything our family has built. Nor will I allow harm to come to innocent villagers who have been deceived by a priest's prejudice." "What are you proposing?" "I am proposing that we educate them. Show them that supernatural does not mean evil, that different does not mean dangerous." Rowena moved to her wardrobe and selected her finest dress, deep blue silk that brought out the silver in her transformed eyes. "If they wish to see what I have become, then let them see. But they will see it with dignity and truth, not through the lens of Father Benedict's hatred." Lady Elsinore watched her daughter prepare for what could only be described as a public debut of her supernatural nature. The courage required was staggering to face a hostile crowd while learning to control newfound abilities, to risk everything on the hope that truth and compassion could overcome fear and prejudice. "You understand that once you reveal yourself, there will be no going back," she warned. "The secret will be exposed, and we will face consequences we cannot yet imagine." The secret was already exposed the moment Father Benedict arrived with his accusations. Rowena fastened the family crest around her neck, the silver medallion seeming to pulse with inner light. "At least, This way, we control the revelation rather than letting others define it for us. As dawn broke over the valley, casting long shadows across the courtyard where angry villagers waited, Lady Elsinore realized that her daughter had grown into a leader overnight. The transformation had awakened not just supernatural abilities, but the ancient nobility that had always run in their bloodline, the strength to make difficult choices, the wisdom to see beyond immediate dangers, and the courage to stand for what was right, regardless of personal cost. "Very well," she said, straightening her own shoulders with aristocratic resolve. "If we are to face this trial, we face it together. But first, we must send word to Lord Malrec. Something tells me we will need his guidance before this day is through." The confrontation Lady Elsinore had expected with the gathered villagers never came. As she and Rowena prepared to address the crowd in the courtyard, a new commotion arose from the direction of the village church. Riders approached at breakneck speed, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim with urgent purpose. "My lady," called out Sir Geoffrey Aldrich, the regional magistrate and an old friend of her late husband. "Thank God we arrived in time. You must gather your household and flee immediately." Lady Elsinore stepped onto the manor's front steps, Rowena beside her, both dressed with the dignity befitting their station. "Sir Geoffrey, what brings you here in such haste?" "Father Benedict is not who he claims to be," the magistrate announced loudly enough for the assembled villagers to hear. "We have received word from the Bishop of Carlisle. The man calling himself Father Benedict murdered the real priest 2 months before arriving in Thornwick. He is an impostor, a member of a radical sect that has been condemned by the church itself." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Murmurs of confusion and disbelief rippled through the assembled villagers as they struggled to process this revelation. Lady Elsinore felt her knees weaken with relief, but also with growing understanding of just how much danger they had been in. "More than that," Sir Geoffrey continued, dismounting from his horse and approaching the manor steps. "He is wanted by ecclesiastical authorities for the murder of 7 families accused of supernatural involvement. Entire bloodlines wiped out based on his testimony of demonic corruption." "7 families," Lady Elsinore repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "7 families," Sir Geoffrey confirmed grimly, "including the Ashfords of Ravensdale, who claimed descent from fairy folk, and the Morrigans of Blackwater, who were said to possess the site. All dead. Men, women, children burned at stakes or hanged as witches based on his accusations." Thomas, the miller, stepped forward, his face pale with horror. "But Father Benedict blessed our children just last Sunday. He gave communion to my wife when she was sick. How could a murderer—" "Because he is very good at deception," interrupted a new voice. Father Martin, the elderly priest who had served Thornwick before Benedict's arrival, emerged from among Sir Geoffrey's riders. Thought long dead, he appeared gaunt and weary, but very much alive. "The man you know as Benedict held me prisoner for months, learning our customs, our families, our histories. He studied us like a hunter studies prey." The shock on the villagers' faces transformed into something darker, anger at being deceived, fear at how close they had come to participating in atrocity, and guilt at how readily they had turned against their noble neighbours. "Where is he now?" Lady Elsinore asked. "Gone," Father Martin replied. "He fled during the night when riders from Carlisle were spotted approaching the valley, but not before." He paused, his expression growing grave. "Not before he managed to complete one final act of violence." "What do you mean?" Rowena asked, speaking for the first time. Sir Geoffrey's face was grim as he answered. "He murdered Dr. Aldrich. We found the good doctor's body at his cottage, throat cut, with symbols carved into his door that matched the calling cards of Benedict's sect. Dr. Aldrich was killed because he treated you, Miss Blackthorne, and refused to declare your condition demonic." Lady Elsinore felt the world tilt around her. Dr. Aldrich, gentle, learned doctor. Aldrich, who had delivered Rowena, who had cared for Edmund during his final illness, who had examined her daughter's wounds with scientific curiosity rather than supernatural fear, dead because he had shown them kindness. "There is more," Sir Geoffrey continued reluctantly. "We found evidence in his belongings that suggests his interest in your family was not random. He carried detailed genealogies, maps of supernatural bloodlines, and correspondence with others of his sect. You were specifically targeted, Lady Blackthorne. Your family was marked for destruction." "But why?" Rowena asked. "What threat could we possibly pose to warrant such persecution?" Father Martin stepped forward, his aged face lined with sorrow and wisdom. "Because your bloodline represents something that men like Benedict cannot. Tolerate proof that the supernatural and the sacred can coexist. That power comes not from rejection of the otherworldly, but from understanding and acceptance of it." "Father Martin," Lady Elsinore said carefully, "what do you know of our family's true history?" The old priest smiled gently. "I know that Evangeline Blackthorne saved this valley through courage and sacrifice. I know that her descendant still wears the family crest that was blessed by vampire blood and holy water alike. And I know that the church, the true church, not the corrupted version that Benedict represented, has protected the secret of that alliance for centuries." He reached into his robes and withdrew a leather portfolio, its surface marked with both Christian crosses and symbols that predated Christianity in the British Isles. "These are the true records, Lady Blackthorne, the ones that tell the complete story of how your ancestors' union with Lord Malrec created a bloodline that has protected this valley from threats both natural and supernatural for over 6 centuries. As Father Martin opened the portfolio, Lady Elsinore saw documents that made the covenant scroll she had seen at Shadowmere Keep seem simple by comparison. There were papal bulls recognizing the supernatural alliance, letters from bishops acknowledging the necessity of the arrangement, and testimonials from other noble houses that had benefited from similar unions. "The Church has always known," she breathed. "The Church has always known and has always chosen to protect such unions rather than condemn them," Father Martin confirmed. "Because the alternative, leaving communities defenseless against supernatural threats, has proven far more costly in human lives." Sir Geoffrey nodded grimly. "Benedict's sect represents a rebellion against this pragmatic approach. They believe that any supernatural influence, no matter how beneficial, represents corruption that must be purged. They have been systematically hunting down families like yours across England and Scotland. How many others like Benedict are there?" Rowena asked. "More than we would like, but fewer than they believe," Father Martin replied. "The sect calls itself the Purification Brotherhood. They have support from some radical church officials, but they operate outside legitimate ecclesiastical authority. In essence, they are heretics who have convinced themselves they serve God by committing murder." Lady Elsinore felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. The increased donations Benedict requested, the expansion of church property. He was preparing to establish a stronghold here. "More than that," Sir Geoffrey said darkly. "We found evidence that Thornwick was intended to be a training ground. New members of the Brotherhood would learn their craft by hunting your family, then move on to other communities with similar supernatural connections." The implications were staggering. Not only had her family been targeted for destruction, but their deaths would have been used to create more killers who would hunt other innocent families across the realm. "Where do we stand now?" Lady Elsinore asked. "Is the immediate threat ended?" "Benedict himself has fled, but we cannot be certain he was working alone," Sir Geoffrey admitted. "Moreover, his time here has left damage that will take months to repair. Village trust has been shattered, old superstitions have been weaponized, and fear has been planted that may bloom again under the right circumstances." Rowena moved to stand beside her mother, her bearing proud and determined despite her youth. "Then we must work to heal that damage. We must show our neighbors that supernatural heritage does not make one a monster. Miss Blackthorne," Father Martin said gently. "Are you prepared for what that will mean? Living openly as what you are, accepting the responsibilities that come with your inherited nature." "I am prepared to honor my ancestors' sacrifice by using the gifts she provided to protect those who cannot protect themselves," Rowena replied firmly. "If that means revealing what I am becoming, so be it." Lady Elsinore looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and trepidation. The girl had aged years in a matter of days, forced by circumstances to make choices that would define not only her own future, but the future of their entire bloodline. "Very well," she said, straightening her shoulders with aristocratic resolve. "If we are to stand openly as guardians of this valley, then we must do so properly. Sir Geoffrey, I request formal recognition of our family's supernatural heritage and the ancient rights that come with it." "Lady Blackthorne," the magistrate said carefully, "are you certain? Once such recognition is granted, there will be no returning to the simple life you have known." Lady Elsinore looked out over the valley that her family had protected for generations, then up toward Shadowmere Keep where Lord Malrec waited. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky with colors that seemed to promise new beginnings. "The simple life was an illusion, Sir Geoffrey. It is time we embraced the truth." But even as she spoke these brave words, Lady Elsinore could not shake the feeling that Benedict's escape meant the real battle was only beginning. Somewhere out there, a killer who had studied her family with predatory patience was planning his return. And when he came back, he would not make the mistake of underestimating them again. The revelation of Benedict's true identity brought unexpected unity to Thornwick Valley, but it also brought urgent preparation for dangers yet to come. In the days following Sir Geoffrey's announcement, the village transformed from a community divided by fear into one galvanized by the knowledge that they had been systematically deceived and manipulated. Lady Elsinore found herself at the center of planning efforts that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. The great hall of Ravenshallow Manor became a war room where nobles, commoners, and supernatural beings worked together to prepare defenses against the Purification Brotherhood's inevitable return. Lord Malrec had descended from his castle fortress for the first time in living memory, bringing with him knowledge accumulated over centuries of dealing with those who would hunt supernatural beings. His presence in the village caused initial nervousness, but his courteous manner and obvious concern for everyone's safety quickly won acceptance from even the most superstitious villagers. "The Brotherhood operates according to predictable patterns," he explained to the assembled council, which included Lady Elsinore, Sir Geoffrey, Father Martin, and representatives from every major family in the valley. "They prefer to attack during religious festivals when communities are gathered together. They use fire as their primary weapon, believing it purifies supernatural corruption. And they always return in greater numbers after an initial failure." "How much time do we have?" asked Master Thomas, who had appointed himself coordinator of the village's practical preparations. "Benedict fled 4 days ago," Lord Malrec calculated. "He will need time to reach the nearest Brotherhood stronghold, report his failure, and return with reinforcements. I estimate we have perhaps 2 weeks before they arrive in force. 2 weeks to prepare an entire community to face enemies who had spent years perfecting the art of supernatural warfare." Lady Elsinore felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. "What do they fear?" she asked. "Surely beings who hunt vampires and other supernatural creatures must have some weaknesses we can exploit." "They fear exposure above all else," Lord Malrec replied. "Their power comes from operating in shadow, from convincing communities that they represent legitimate religious authority. When their true nature is revealed, they become vulnerable to both ecclesiastical and secular justice." Sir Geoffrey nodded thoughtfully. "I have already dispatched messengers to the Bishop of Carlisle and to the Lord Lieutenant of the county. Both have promised to send investigators and armed support. But reinforcements may not arrive before the Brotherhood does. Then, we must be prepared to defend ourselves, Lady Elsinore declared. What do we need? The planning that followed was unlike anything the valley had ever seen. Lord Malrec shared knowledge of protective wards and blessed silver that could turn aside supernatural hunters' weapons. Father Martin contributed understanding of legitimate church doctrine that could counter the Brotherhood's twisted theology. Sir Geoffrey organized the secular defenses, ensuring that every able-bodied person knew their role in the coming confrontation. But perhaps most importantly, Rowena emerged as a bridge between the human and supernatural elements of their defense. Her transformation had progressed to the point where she could communicate with the various otherworldly beings that inhabited the valley's forests, creatures that had remained hidden for generations but were now willing to help, protect their home from the Brotherhood's purifying flames. "There are others like us?" Lady Elsinore asked when her daughter returned from one of her mysterious expeditions into Whispering Woods. "Not vampires exactly, but beings with one foot in each world," Rowena explained. "Families that carry fey blood, individuals gifted with the sight, even a few who can speak with animals. The Brotherhood's definition of corruption is broad enough to threaten anyone who doesn't fit their narrow vision of humanity." Lady Elsinore marveled at how naturally her daughter had adapted to her new role as liaison between communities that had existed in parallel for centuries without truly knowing each other. The girl who had once been content to read books and tend gardens now moved through supernatural society with confidence that belied her 16 years. As the days passed, an unlikely alliance took shape. The village blacksmith worked with Lord Malrec to forge weapons that could harm supernatural hunters. The village women, led by Lady Elsinore, prepared supplies and organized evacuation routes for the most vulnerable. Even the children contributed, learning to recognize the signs of Brotherhood infiltration and the proper procedures for raising alarms. But it was in the private moments, when the planning sessions ended and the public preparations were complete, that Lady Elsinore found herself grappling with the deeper implications of their situation. She stood in her private chamber one evening, examining the protection amulet that Lord Malrec had created by combining her family crest with a drop of his own ancient blood. The talisman was beautiful in its simplicity, silver worked with symbols that seemed to shift in candlelight, creating patterns that spoke to something deep in her inherited memory. When worn, it allowed Rowena to control her transformation, to access supernatural strength without losing her essential humanity. "You are worried?" Lord Malrec observed, appearing in her doorway with the silent grace that marked his supernatural nature. "I am terrified," Lady Elsinore corrected with characteristic honesty. "Not of the Brotherhood, though they are certainly dangerous. I am terrified of what we are asking of these people. They have agreed to fight beside supernatural beings against enemies they do not fully understand. Some of them will die. Some of them will die regardless," Lord Malrec replied gently, entering the chamber and moving to stand beside the window that looked out over the valley. "The Brotherhood does not distinguish between supernatural beings and those who harbor them. Every person in this valley was marked for death the moment Benedict identified your family's heritage. But now they know the truth. They could flee, start new lives elsewhere. Where? The Brotherhood's reach extends across England and into Scotland. There is nowhere these people could run that would guarantee their safety." Lord Malrec turned to face her, his pale eyes reflecting moonlight. "Lady Blackthorn, your people have chosen to fight not because they were deceived, but because they understand the stakes. They fight for their homes, their families, and their right to exist without fear of persecution." Lady Elsinore moved to join him at the window, where the lights of cottage hearths twinkled like earthbound stars. "When this began, I thought I was simply protecting my daughter from a supernatural threat. I never imagined we would end up leading a war against religious extremism. Leadership is rarely chosen, Lord Malrec observed. It is usually thrust upon those who happen to be standing in the right place when history requires someone to take responsibility. And you? How many times have you found yourself in that position? More than I care to remember. Each time, I have told myself that I prefer solitude, that I am not suited to the complexities of human politics and emotions. He smiled ruefully. Each time, circumstances have proven me wrong. Their conversation was interrupted by rapid footsteps in the corridor outside. Rowena appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright with urgency. "Mother, Lord Malrec, we have visitors. A delegation from the Brotherhood has arrived under a flag of truce. They wish to negotiate." Lady Elsinore felt ice form in her veins. "So soon? Benedict himself leads them," Rowena continued. "He stands at our gates with a dozen men, all bearing crosses and holy symbols. But," she paused, her enhanced senses detecting something her mother and Lord Malrec could not. "There is something wrong with them. They smell of death and old blood, and their leader is not entirely human anymore." Lord Malrec's expression darkened with understanding. "The Brotherhood has been experimenting with supernatural enhancement. They seek to fight monsters by becoming monsters themselves." "What kind of enhancement?" Lady Elsinore asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Blood magic, corrupted vampire essence that grants strength and longevity without the accompanying wisdom or restraint." Lord Malrec moved toward the door, his manner suddenly businesslike. "They have made themselves into weapons designed specifically to hunt beings like me." "Then we do not negotiate," Lady Elsinore declared, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "Whatever they offer will be a trap designed to separate us from our defenses." "Agreed, but we must still respond to their request for parley. The forms must be observed, or they will claim justification for immediate attack." As they descended to the great hall, Lady Elsinore found herself thinking about the choices that had led to a scene this moment. A week ago, she had been a widow concerned with estate management and her daughter's proper upbringing. Now she was preparing to face corrupted vampire hunters while allied with the very supernatural beings those hunters sought to destroy. The irony was not lost on her. In seeking to purify the world of supernatural influence, the Brotherhood had embraced a corruption far more damaging than anything they claimed to oppose. They had become the very monsters they professed to hunt. "Whatever happens tonight," she said quietly as they approached the manor's front doors, "I want you both to know that I regret nothing, not the covenant, not the awakening, not the alliance we have forged. For the first time in my life, I feel as though I am truly alive." Lord Malrec inclined his head with formal courtesy. "Your ancestor would be proud of the woman you have become." Rowena took her mother's hand, squeezing gently. "Together," she said simply. "Together, Lady Elsinore." "Agreed." Outside, Benedict and his corrupted hunters waited in the courtyard, their torches casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with unnatural life. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Lady Elsinore knew that whatever the outcome, neither she nor her family would ever be the same. The protection amulet pulsed warm against her throat, a reminder of the love that had created the alliance between her bloodline and Lord Malrec's. Whatever evil the Brotherhood had embraced, it could not stand against the power born of willing sacrifice and mutual respect. She straightened her shoulders, drew upon generations of aristocratic courage, and prepared to face the corrupted priest who had turned her world upside down. The war for Thornwick Valley was about to reach its climax. The confrontation began at midnight, as Lady Elsinore had known it would. Benedict stood in the manor's courtyard, surrounded by his corrupted hunters, their faces bearing the gaunt, predatory look of beings who had sacrificed their humanity for supernatural power. In the torchlight, Lady Elsinore could see that their leader was no longer entirely human. His eyes held the red gleam of corrupted vampire essence, and his movements possessed an unnatural fluidity that spoke of dark enhancement. "Lady Blackthorn," Benedict called, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed designed to inspire fear. I offer you one final opportunity to save your soul and the souls of your people. Surrender the abomination you call daughter, renounce your alliance with the creature of darkness, and accept purification through the Church's mercy. Lady Elsinore stepped forward, flanked by Lord Malrec and Rowena. Behind them, the defenders of Thornwick Valley took their positions, villagers armed with blessed silver, supernatural beings ready to protect their sanctuary, and Sir Geoffrey's men-at-arms prepared for conventional warfare. I reject your offer, she declared, her voice carrying across the courtyard with aristocratic authority. You are no longer a priest, Benedict, if you ever truly were one. You are a murderer and heretic who has corrupted himself with the very supernatural forces you claim to oppose. Benedict's laugh was cold and mechanical, devoid of any human warmth. Corruption? We have embraced the tools necessary to cleanse the world of abomination. Sometimes one must become a monster to hunt monsters effectively. Then you have already lost, Lord Malrec replied quietly. For you have become precisely what you sought to destroy, while we have found strength in acceptance rather than corruption. The false priest raised his hand, and his hunters began to advance. Lady Elsinore saw immediately that these were not ordinary men armed with crosses and holy water. They moved with predatory grace, their enhanced strength evident in every step. Whatever process the Brotherhood had used to augment their abilities, it had created something far more dangerous than simple religious zealots. Activate the sanctuary seal, Lady Elsinore commanded. Lord Malrec and Rowena moved to opposite sides of the courtyard, where ancient symbols had been carved into the manor's foundation stones. As they placed their hands on the protective marks, Lady Elsinore felt power surge through the ground beneath her feet. The sanctuary seal, a defensive ward that required both vampire lord and supernatural heir, working in perfect harmony, blazed to life with silver radiance. The advancing hunters stumbled as the protective barrier rose around them, their corrupted enhancements suddenly turned against them by magic designed to repel those who had perverted their essential nature. Benedict snarled in fury, his human facade cracking to reveal something bestial underneath. You think ancient magic can protect you from the righteous fury of God's chosen instruments, he roared. I think corrupted magic cannot stand against power, freely given and willingly shared, Lady Elsinore replied. You have stolen supernatural abilities through violence and perversion. We have inherited them through love and sacrifice. The distinction proved crucial. As Benedict's hunters threw themselves against the sanctuary seal, their stolen vampire essence recoiled from barriers designed to protect supernatural beings who existed in harmony with their nature rather than in opposition to it. But the Brotherhood had not come unprepared. Benedict withdrew a silver chalice from within his robes, a vessel that radiated malevolent power and seemed to drink in the surrounding light. Behold the cup of purification, he declared, raising the artifact above his head. Forged from the melted-down bones of 7 vampire lords, blessed with the blood of innocent children, and consecrated with prayers of hatred rather than love. This vessel can pierce any supernatural defense. Lady Elsinore felt horror wash over her as she recognized the true depth of the Brotherhood's corruption. They had not simply embraced supernatural power, they had twisted it into something fundamentally evil, using murder and innocent suffering as the foundation of their abilities. You are insane, she breathed. We are dedicated, Benedict corrected, dedicated to a vision of world purified of supernatural taint, no matter what sacrifices must be made to achieve it. He raised the corrupted chalice toward the sanctuary seal, and Lady Elsinore watched in alarm as dark energy began to eat away at their protective barrier. The stolen vampire essence in his hunter's blood resonated with the cup's evil power, creating a feedback loop that amplified their ability to breach supernatural defenses. The seal will not hold, Lord Malrec warned, strain evident in his voice as he poured more power into the protective ward. Then we fight, Rowena declared, her own supernatural nature flaring to life in response to the threat. Lady Elsinore drew the blessed silver sword that Sir Geoffrey had provided, feeling its weight settle comfortably in her hand. Around the courtyard, their allies prepared for battle, villagers, gripping weapons that had been sanctified with both holy water and vampire blood, supernatural beings calling upon ancient powers, and human defenders ready to stand beside inhuman allies. For Thornwick Valley, Lady Elsinore called out, for our families, our homes, and our right to exist without fear. For the covenant that protects us all, Lord Malrec added, his own blade singing as it cleared its sheath. For the future we will build together, Rowena finished, silver light blazing from her eyes as her inherited abilities reached their full potential. The sanctuary seal finally shattered under the corrupted chalice's assault, and Benedict's hunters poured through the breach like a tide of supernatural malevolence. The final battle for Thornwick Valley had begun, and Lady Elsinore knew that everything she held dear hung in the balance. The battle erupted across the manor grounds with supernatural fury unleashed on both sides. Benedict's corrupted hunters moved with inhuman speed and strength, their stolen vampire essence granting them abilities that would have overwhelmed ordinary defenders. But the alliance forged in Thornwick Valley proved stronger than the Brotherhood had anticipated. Lady Elsinore found herself fighting beside beings she had never imagined could exist. A village woman whose fey heritage granted her the ability to confuse enemies with illusions stood back to back with Lord Malrec as he wielded centuries of combat experience against multiple attackers. Rowena moved through the melee like a force of nature, her emerging vampire abilities guided by inherited instincts that made her a formidable opponent, despite her youth. The chalice, Lord Malrec called out during a brief lull in the fighting. Benedict's power is anchored in that corrupted artifact. Without it, his hunters will lose their supernatural enhancement. Lady Elsinore could see the twisted silver vessel in Benedict's hands, dark energy radiating from its surface as he used it to coordinate his forces' attacks. But reaching him meant fighting through a circle of defenders who had embraced corruption so thoroughly that they barely resembled the men they had once been. I can get close to him, Rowena offered, silver light blazing from her eyes as she prepared to use her supernatural speed. No, Lady Elsinore said firmly. That chalice was designed specifically to harm beings like you. We need another approach. The answer came from an unexpected source. Father Martin, the elderly priest who had been thought dead for months, emerged from the shadows, carrying something that made Benedict's corrupted followers recoil in genuine fear. The Unity Chalice, a ceremonial cup that had been blessed by the original covenant between House Blackthorn and House Malrec. This vessel was sanctified with love rather than hatred, Father Martin called out, his aged voice carrying clearly across the battlefield. It was blessed with willing sacrifice rather than stolen power, and it carries the authority of legitimate church doctrine rather than heretical corruption. Benedict snarled when he saw the true chalice, his red eyes blazing with fury. Impossible. That relic was destroyed centuries ago. Hidden, not destroyed, Father Martin corrected. Preserved by those who understood that some alliances transcend the narrow prejudices of frightened men. The two chalices began to resonate against each other, their conflicting energies creating visible distortions in the air between them. Lady Elsinore watched in amazement as the Unity Chalice's blessed radiance began to overwhelm the corrupted vessel's dark power. The cups are neutralizing each other, Lord Malrec observed with grim satisfaction. Benedict's hunters are losing their supernatural enhancement. Indeed, the false priests, the followers had begun to stumble and weaken as the stolen vampire essence in their blood turned against them. Without the chalice's corrupted power to sustain their unnatural abilities, they were being consumed from within by forces they had never properly understood. But Benedict himself proved more resilient than his followers. Drawing upon reserves of malevolent power that spoke of personal corruption deeper than simple blood magic, he raised his twisted chalice high and spoke words in a language that predated Christianity in the British Isles. "If I cannot have purification through victory," he declared, "then I will achieve it through destruction. Let this valley burn with purifying fire that consumes both the corrupt and the innocent alike." Flames began to erupt from the corrupted chalice, not ordinary fire, but supernatural conflagration designed to consume anything touched by otherworldly influence. The flames spread rapidly across the manor grounds, threatening to engulf defenders and attackers alike. Lady Elsinore realized with growing horror that Benedict's final strategy was not victory, but martyrdom. He intended to destroy everyone in the valley rather than accept defeat. "The Unity Chalice can contain the fire," Father Martin called out, "but only if it is wielded by one who embodies the covenant it represents." Lady Elsinore understood immediately what he meant. The ceremonial cup had been blessed to symbolize the willing union of human and vampire bloodlines. To use its power effectively, one needed to represent both heritages simultaneously. "Rowena cannot do it alone," she said. "Her transformation is incomplete. She is still more human than vampire. And Lord Malrec cannot do it either," the vampire lord added grimly. "I am fully supernatural, with no mortal heritage to balance the equation." Lady Elsinore looked at her daughter, seeing understanding dawn in the girl's silver-flecked eyes. There was only one solution that could save them all, but it required a sacrifice that would change everything forever. "Mother, no," Rowena whispered. "Mother, yes," Lady Elsinore replied firmly. She turned to Lord Malrec. "The covenant was sealed with willing transformation. If I accept vampire blood freely given, I can wield the Unity Chalice with full authority." "The transformation could kill you," Lord Malrec warned. "At your age, with no supernatural heritage awakened—" "I have supernatural heritage," Lady Elsinore corrected, touching the family crest at her throat. "It has simply remained dormant until now." Without waiting for further argument, she stepped forward and took Lord Malrec's hand. "I freely accept the blood of covenant, given in love, rather than taken in corruption." The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. As vampire essence flowed through her veins, Lady Elsinore felt centuries of inherited memory awakening, felt the dormant supernatural heritage in her bloodline blazing to life. She was no longer simply Rowena's mother. She was the heir to Evangeline Blackthorn's courage and the guardian of a legacy that transcended the boundaries between human and supernatural worlds. With newfound strength and ancient wisdom flowing through her, Lady Elsinore grasped the Unity Chalice and raised it toward Benedict's corrupted flames. The Unity Chalice blazed with silver radiance as Lady Elsinore raised it against Benedict's supernatural fire. The blessed vessel responded to her transformed nature, recognizing in her the perfect embodiment of the covenant it had been created to protect. Light poured from the chalice like liquid starlight, washing over the corrupted flames and transforming them from instruments of destruction into purifying radiance that healed rather than consumed. Benedict's scream of rage echoed across the valley as his final gambit failed. The corrupted chalice in his hands cracked and shattered, its stolen power unable to withstand the pure authority of love freely given. Without the artifact to sustain him, the false priest's own supernatural enhancements began to consume him from within. His followers collapsed as the stolen vampire essence burned through their mortal frames, leaving them broken but mercifully freed from the corruption they had embraced. "It is finished," Lady Elsinore said quietly, her voice carrying new harmonics that spoke of profound transformation. The Unity Chalice's light faded to a gentle glow as the immediate danger passed, but its power remained accessible to her in ways that would have been impossible before her willing acceptance of vampire heritage. Benedict himself lay dying in the courtyard, his mortal frame finally succumbing to the supernatural forces he had never properly understood. In his final moments, something almost human flickered in his eyes. A glimpse of the man he might have been before, hatred and fear, twisted his faith into something monstrous. "Why?" he whispered, blood frothing at his lips. "Why protect abominations that threaten the natural order?" Lady Elsinore knelt beside him, her enhanced senses allowing her to see the genuine confusion beneath his malice. "Because love is stronger than fear," she replied gently. "Because acceptance creates strength, while hatred breeds only weakness. Because the natural order is far more complex and beautiful than your narrow vision could encompass." Benedict's eyes closed for the final time, and Lady Elsinore felt only sorrow for the wasted potential of a life consumed by prejudice and corrupted purpose. Sir Geoffrey emerged from where he had been coordinating the defense of non-combatants, his expression one of profound relief mixed with concern. "My lady, are you?" He paused, taking in her transformed appearance with the careful attention of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew about supernatural beings. "I am exactly who I have always been," Lady Elsinore replied, rising to face him with dignity. Intact, despite her changed nature. A mother, protecting her daughter, a noble safeguarding her people, and now, a guardian ensuring that this valley remains a sanctuary for all who seek peace rather than conflict. Over the following days, the aftermath of the battle settled into new patterns of coexistence that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. The village of Thornwick officially recognized the supernatural heritage of several families, establishing protocols for peaceful integration that served as a model for other communities facing similar revelations. Rowena flourished under the guidance of both her transformed mother and Lord Malrec, learning to balance her dual nature with wisdom beyond her years. Her abilities stabilized into something powerful but controlled, allowing her to serve as a bridge between the human and supernatural communities that now work together to protect their shared home. "The new covenant scroll must be drafted carefully," Father Martin advised during one of their planning sessions. The elderly priest had emerged from the conflict with enhanced authority, having been personally commended by the Bishop of Carlisle for his role in exposing the Brotherhood's corruption. This document will establish precedents that other regions will follow. It must protect supernatural beings from persecution while ensuring that such power is used responsibly. Lady Elsinore nodded thoughtfully as she reviewed the proposed language. Her transformation had brought not just physical changes, but expanded understanding of the delicate balance required to maintain peace between different forms of life. The new covenant would formalize what they had learned through trial and conflict, that strength came from unity rather than supremacy, from acceptance rather than domination. "We should include provisions for education," she suggested. "Future generations must understand both the history and the responsibilities that come with supernatural heritage. Ignorance breeds the kind of fear that the Brotherhood exploited." Lord Malrec, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, smiled with genuine warmth. "Evangeline would be proud of what you have accomplished. She sought to save a single valley from plague. You have created a foundation for lasting peace between worlds." The comment brought a flush of satisfaction to Lady Elsinore's transformed features. She had found her place in a legacy that stretched back centuries, while pointing toward a future filled with possibilities her grandmother could never have imagined. 3 months after the battle, Thornwick Valley hosted its first Festival of Covenant, a celebration that honored both human and supernatural contributions to the community's prosperity. Villagers who had once feared the unknown worked alongside beings they now considered neighbors and friends. Children who carried mixed heritage played games that would have seemed like magic to previous generations, while their parents discussed trade agreements and defensive alliances with the same practical attention they had once reserved for purely mundane concerns. Lady Elsinore stood on the balcony of Ravenshollow Manor, watching the festivities with deep contentment. Rowena moved through the crowd below, equally at home with human villagers and supernatural visitors. Lord Malrec had emerged from centuries of isolation to become a respected advisor whose counsel was sought on matters both mystical and practical. The family crest that hung around her neck, now enhanced with symbols representing their expanded covenant, caught the afternoon sunlight with unusual brilliance. The silver wolf beneath 3 stars had been joined by new elements that spoke of willing transformation, protective alliance, and love that transcended the boundaries of species and mortality. "No regrets?" Rowena asked, joining her mother on the balcony. "None whatsoever," Lady Elsinore replied, placing an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "For the first time in my life, I feel as though we are truly living rather than simply existing." Below them, the Festival of Covenant continued into the evening, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars across a valley that had found peace through acceptance of its own complex nature. The future stretched ahead, filled with challenges and opportunities that would require the wisdom they had gained and the unity they had forged. Lady Elsinore smiled, knowing that whatever trials might come, they would face them together, human and supernatural, mortal and immortal, bound by love rather than divided by fear.